You can retire now. Take that rusting pile of scrap metal home with you.
The salesman grinned as the autonomous bulldozer rolled past the old farmer without a driver in the cab. Investors applauded. Cameras recorded everything. It looked like the future had finally replaced experience. 3 weeks later, a powerful solar storm wiped out satellite navigation across the region, leaving an entire logging operation stranded in the middle of a wildfire. The only machine that kept moving belonged to the man everyone had just mocked. The air in Oakhaven County tasted of damp pine needles and cold metal. Morning fog clung to the ridges of the black pine forest. Down in the valley, the heavy thud of champagne corks echoed against the ancient timber. Veridian Forestry was celebrating. They had brought the future to the woods of Oregon. Marcus stood at the center of the clearing. He wore a tailored charcoal suit. His Italian suede shoes sank slightly into the wet mud. He did not mind. The drone cameras were circling above, broadcasting his triumph to a board of directors 1,000 miles away. Behind him, a fleet of massive, pristine yellow machines idled. There were no cabs, no steering wheels, just sensor pods, glass lenses, and cold, calculating algorithms. Caleb watched from the edge of the tree line. He was 71 years old. He wore a faded flannel shirt and a canvas jacket that had seen more rain than the dirt beneath his boots. His face looked like the bark of a weathered oak. He chewed slowly on the end of an unlit cigar. Marcus walked over. He held a crisp, white envelope. He stopped just short of Caleb's rusted pickup truck, careful not to let the muddy splash guard brush against his slacks. "It is over, old man," Marcus said. His voice was smooth, polished, empty. "We do not need scouts anymore. We do not need rangers. The satellites map every rock, every slope, every single tree. The drones scan the soil moisture. The machines do the rest." Marcus tossed the envelope onto the hood of Caleb's truck. The paper slid down the rusty slope and stopped against a windshield wiper. It was a severance package, a forced eviction from the company land. "Pack up your cabin," Marcus said. "The demolition crew needs the land for a charging station by the end of the month. The forest belongs to the grid now." Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. He looked at the envelope. He looked at the fleet of driverless machines. Then, he looked at Marcus. The young executive's smile was wide, but his eyes were nervous. He expected anger. He expected a fight. Caleb gave him nothing. The old man reached out. His fingers were thick, the knuckles swollen from 5 decades of gripping heavy chains and steering wheels. Grease and dirt were permanently tattooed into the lifelines of his palm. He picked up the envelope. He folded it once, twice, and slipped it into his breast pocket. He struck a match against the side of his truck. The flame flared. He lit his cigar. Thick, blue smoke drifted between them. Caleb opened the door of his truck. The hinges screamed in protest. He climbed in, turned the key, and the engine rattled to life with a heavy, uneven cough. He put it in gear and drove away. He did not look back. Behind him, the investors clapped. The machines rolled forward. There is a quiet tragedy in watching the world discard the hands that built it. We live in an age where glass screens and cold data demand our total obedience. We are told that speed is better than wisdom, that an algorithm is safer than a man who has bled into the soil. But deep down, you know the truth. You feel it when you look at an old photograph, or when you smell motor oil on a cold morning. If you still believe that a pair of calloused hands holds more value than a shiny promise, if you find comfort in the quiet strength of the old ways, take a second to subscribe to this channel. You belong here. We are building a sanctuary for the things that matter, and your presence keeps that fire burning. The road back to Caleb's cabin was steep. The tires of his truck crunched over gravel that he had laid down himself 30 years ago. The cabin sat on a high ridge overlooking the valley. It was small, cedar logs, a tin roof, a stone chimney. Smoke curled lazily into the gray sky. He stepped inside. The air was warm. The smell of burning hickory and old coffee filled the room. Caleb took off his jacket. He hung it on a rusted nail by the door. He walked to the center of the living room and knelt on the braided rug. He pushed the rug aside. The floorboards were wide and worn smooth. He pressed his thumb against a specific knot in the wood. The board shifted. He pried it up with the edge of his pocket knife. Beneath the floor, Resting in the dry darkness was a metal box. It was an old cigar tin from 1958. The paint had chipped away, leaving patches of dull silver. Caleb lifted it out. The metal was cold against his skin. He carried it to the wooden table by the window. He sat down. He opened the lid. There were no medals inside, no old photographs, just two pieces of paper. The first was a map. It was made of thick, cured leather, drawn with heavy black ink. It was not a map of roads or highways. It was a map of the veins of the black pine forest. It showed the forgotten logging trails, the hidden limestone caves, the dry creek beds that ran beneath the heavy canopy. It was drawn by his father, 60 years ago. No satellite could see through the dense branches to find these paths. No laser could scan a tunnel hidden behind a waterfall. The map was a memory of the earth itself. The second piece of paper was a contract. It was yellowed at the edges. The type was stamped deep into the thick paper by an old manual typewriter. At the bottom, a heavy red wax seal sat next to faded signatures. It was a timber rights agreement from 1960. Caleb ran his thumb over the text. He stopped at a specific paragraph. Section 4, Paragraph 2, the Forest Salvage Right. It was an old logging law, written when men still died trying to tame the woods. It stated clearly, any man who pulls stranded assets from the Black Pine Territory during a natural disaster holds the right of salvage. The compensation was set in stone, 30% of the total value of the recovered property. Caleb folded the papers. He put them in his pocket. He looked out the window. The sky above the eastern ridge was beginning to change color. A strange, unnatural purple hue was bleeding into the gray clouds. The air felt heavy. Static crackled from the old radio on the shelf. The hair on Caleb's arms stood up. He walked to the corner of the room. He picked up a heavy canvas bag. He filled it with 2 wrenches, a pair of thick leather gloves, and a thermos of black coffee. The world was about to go dark. The sky above the valley turned the color of bruised iron. The wind stopped. A strange, suffocating silence fell over the black pine forest. Birds ceased their singing. The air grew thick, pressing down on the chest like a physical weight. 93 million miles away, the sun had exhaled. A massive wave of electromagnetic energy crashed into the upper atmosphere of the Earth. Deep in the woods, inside the climate-controlled command trailer of Veridian Forestry, Marcus was sipping sparkling water. He sat in a plush leather chair. In front of him, a massive wall of glass screens displayed the movements of 12 autonomous bulldozers. Tiny green dots moved perfectly along digital topographic grids. The machines were clearing a ridge 3 miles away. It was flawless. It was efficient. It was entirely dependent on an invisible web of satellites orbiting in space. Then, the screens flickered. Marcus lowered his glass. A young engineer in a white polo shirt tapped frantically on a keyboard. The green dots on the map stopped moving. The topographical grid shattered into a mosaic of broken pixels. One by one, the screens turned pitch black. In the center of the main display, 2 words flashed in glaring red letters. No signal. Marcus stood up. The ice in his glass clinked loudly in the sudden quiet of the trailer. He asked the engineer what was happening. The young man's hands trembled over the keys. He pointed to a small gauge in the corner of his tablet. The satellite connection had dropped from 32 available nodes to absolutely 0. The GPS network was gone. 3 miles away, on the ridge, $20 million worth of cutting-edge machinery simply died. The autonomous bulldozers locked their hydraulic brakes. Their engines idled, waiting for a command from a sky that had gone deaf. They were no longer the future of forestry. They were giant, yellow paperweights. Before Marcus could scream an order, the sky cracked open. There was no rain, just a blinding flash of dry lightning. The bolt struck an ancient, dead pine tree near the ridge. The dry wood exploded into splinters. Sparks showered down onto a bed of dead needles that had been baking in the sun for weeks. In seconds, a wall of orange flame erupted. The wind suddenly returned, pulling the oxygen into the valley and feeding the fire. Thick, black smoke rolled over the tree line. Inside the command trailer, the smell of burning wood leaked through the air vents. The engineers panicked. They grabbed their tablets. They opened their digital maps to find an escape route. The screens were blank. They had relied on GPS to drive them into the forest. Without it, They did not know which dirt roads led to the highway, and which ones led to a dead end at the edge of a canyon. They were trapped in a maze of towering trees, and the maze was burning. Marcus pushed past the engineers. He burst through the trailer door. The heat hit him like a physical blow. The sky rained white ash. He looked toward the ridge. The fire was moving fast, swallowing the dry timber, heading straight for the stranded fleet of AI machines, and straight toward them. For the first time in his life, Marcus realized that nature did not care about his algorithms, his degree, or his tailored suit. 5 miles away, on his front porch, Caleb watched the smoke rise. It was a thick, black pillar twisting into the dark sky. The smell of burning pine reached his nose. He took a sip from his thermos. The coffee was black, bitter, and hot. He did not rush. Panic is a luxury a man in the woods cannot afford. He screwed the cap onto the thermos. He picked up his canvas bag and walked toward the old barn behind his cabin. The wooden doors were heavy, warped by decades of rain. He pushed them open. The smell of old grease, damp earth, and diesel fuel hung in the shadows. Sitting in the center of the dirt floor was his bulldozer. A Caterpillar D4, built in 1958. The yellow paint had long faded to a dull, rusted brown. It was scarred from rocks, branches, and time. It did not have a sealed glass cabin. It did not have air conditioning, sensors, or computer chips. It had an open iron seat, 2 steering clutches, and a steel blade that weighed more than a modern pickup truck. It was a machine of pure, unyielding mechanics. 65 horsepower, generated by heavy pistons and sheer compression. A solar storm could burn every circuit board on Earth to ash, and this beast would not even blink. Caleb climbed into the iron seat. The metal was cold. He pulled the choke. He adjusted the throttle lever. He gripped the starter mechanism. He did not turn a delicate plastic key. He pulled the heavy lever with the strength of a man who had wrestled timber his entire life. The diesel engine turned over. It coughed once. A thick cloud of black smoke shot out of the vertical exhaust pipe. Then it caught. The engine roared to life with a deafening, rhythmic hammering. The ground beneath the barn trembled. The steel tracks rattled. The machine sounded like a hungry, angry beast waking from a long sleep. Caleb put on his heavy leather gloves. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded edge of his father's leather map. He did not need to look at it. He knew the map by heart. He shifted the heavy iron gear lever. The transmission clunked into place. The massive steel tracks bit into the dirt. The old Caterpillar rolled out of the barn. Caleb drove it past his cabin, down the gravel driveway, and turned straight toward the towering wall of black smoke. He was not driving on the main logging road. He steered the machine into a thick cluster of brush, pushing through the branches, entering a forgotten trail that no satellite had ever seen. He drove into the fire. The heat in the valley was becoming unbearable. The sky above Veridian Forestry's command site was entirely black, lit only by the angry, pulsing orange glow of the approaching fire. The wind howled, carrying the roar of burning timber that sounded like a freight train rushing through the woods. Ash fell like snow, coating Marcus's tailored suit in a layer of gray grime. The engineers were huddled near the trailer, coughing violently into their shirts. They had tried to drive the company trucks out, but the main logging road was already blocked by a massive, burning oak tree that had fallen across the path. Their digital tablets were useless bricks of glass. They were blind. They were paralyzed. Marcus wiped a mixture of sweat and soot from his forehead. He stared at the ridge. Through the smoke, he could see the silhouette of his fleet, 12 autonomous machines, worth $20 million, sitting frozen as the flames licked at their steel tracks. The fire was less than a mile away from the command site. The heat was blistering the paint on the side of the trailer. "We have to run," one of the young engineers screamed, panic breaking his voice. "We have to run into the trees." "And go where?" Marcus yelled back. "You do not even know which direction is north." "We stay here. The fire department will send helicopters." But as he looked up into the suffocating cloud of smoke, Marcus knew no helicopter could fly through that thermal chaos. They were entirely alone. The polished executive, who had spent his morning preaching the supremacy of technology, was now praying for a miracle in the dirt. Then he felt it. It started as a vibration in the soles of his Italian shoes, a rhythmic, heavy thumping that shook the damp earth. The sound grew louder, piercing through the roar of the fire. It was the deep, mechanical hammering of a heavy diesel engine, not a sleek, quiet, electric motor. This was the violent, angry sound of combustion and steel. From the dense wall of smoke and brush on the western edge of the clearing, a massive steel blade crashed through the undergrowth. Trees the thickness of a man's thigh snapped like matchsticks. The rusted Caterpillar D4 emerged from the smoke like a ghost of the past. Caleb sat in the open iron seat. He wore no respirator, just a bandana pulled up over his nose and his battered canvas jacket. His hands rested firmly on the steel steering clutches. He did not look like an old man being forced into retirement. He looked like the king of the mountain. He steered the bulldozer into the clearing, the massive tracks grinding the mud into paste. He brought the machine to a halt 10 feet from Marcus. The engine idled, a low, menacing growl. Caleb reached down and killed the throttle just enough so they could hear each other. He pulled the bandana down. His face was streaked with soot, but his eyes were ice cold. Marcus stumbled forward. His polished veneer was completely gone. He was shaking. You came back. Thank God. The main road is blocked. You have to use this thing to push the tree out of the way. You have to get us out of here. Caleb looked at him. He did not smile. He did not gloat. Get your men into the trucks, Marcus. I'm taking you out of here because I'm not a murderer. Marcus gasped, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Thank you. Thank you. And the machines? The fleet? We have to save them. Caleb stopped. He looked at the wall of fire, then back at the expensive, frozen robots. I'll save your lives for free. That's just being a neighbor. But those machines? That's business. Moving $20 million of dead weight through a forest fire isn't part of a rescue, it's a salvage operation. Caleb pulled the yellowed contract from his tin box. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Salvage rights. I don't work for you, and I don't owe your board of directors anything. If you want me to risk my D4 and my life to bring your future back to the highway, you sign this. You're not signing for your life, Marcus. You're signing to save your job and your company's balance sheet. Marcus looked at the fire, then at the contract. This wasn't a man holding a gun to his head. It was a contractor stating his price for a high-risk job. His hands trembled, but he realized this was the only way to avoid a total corporate write-off. He pressed the paper against the command trailer and signed his name, officially recognizing Caleb as the lead salvage contractor for the fleet's core assets. He handed the paper back. He looked defeated, broken. Caleb took the contract. He inspected the signature. He folded it carefully and placed it back into the tin box. He slid the box deep into his inside pocket and buttoned the jacket. Get your men into the company trucks, Caleb said, his voice dropping into an authoritative command. Do not follow the main road. Follow my tracks. He turned and climbed back onto the iron seat of the Caterpillar. He slammed the heavy gear lever forward. The engine roared, a magnificent, deafening sound that echoed above the fire. Caleb pulled the left steering clutch. The right track drove forward, pivoting the massive machine with brutal force. He did not head toward the main road. He pointed the steel blade straight toward a dense, seemingly impenetrable wall of brush and rock on the eastern slope. He was going to open a road that had not seen sunlight in 40 years. The steel blade of the Caterpillar slammed into the wall of brush. Decades of overgrown thorns and rotting timber snapped under the raw, focused weight of the machine. Caleb wasn't trying to tow 12 massive bulldozers. That was a physical impossibility. Instead, he was the tip of the spear. Behind him, the engineers scrambled into their heavy-duty 4x4 transport trucks. They abandoned the individual autonomous units on the ridge, knowing they were lost, but they frantically hooked the main command trailer, the mobile brain containing the proprietary AI servers and satellite uplink tech, to the back of Caleb's D4. The old Caterpillar groaned as the steel cable went taut. The command trailer was heavy, but on the path Caleb was carving, it was manageable. The transport trucks followed in his wake, driving through the path he cleared, protected by the massive wall of the D4. Caleb wasn't just a driver. He was a human GPS, feeling the bedrock through the tracks, ensuring the convoy didn't sink into the soft, fire-heated loam. They fell in line behind the rusted bulldozer. They were entirely dependent on an old man driving completely blind. There was no satellite guiding Caleb. There was no digital compass on his dashboard. He navigated by the slope of the land beneath his iron seat. He felt the subtle dip of the terrain. He was following the ghost of a dry creek bed that his father had mapped 60 years ago. The heat was suffocating. The air turned into a superheated oven. Ash clumped to Caleb's sweat-soaked shirt. Sparks rained down on his exposed arms, leaving tiny, blistering burns on his skin. He did not flinch. He did not wipe his face. His hands gripped the steering clutches with the unyielding strength of a man who knew the mountain respected only force. To his left, a towering pine tree, completely engulfed in flames, groaned. The roots gave way. The massive, burning trunk fell directly toward the convoy. Inside the transport trucks, Marcus screamed, bracing for the impact. Caleb did not stop. He did not swerve. He pulled the right clutch, angling the caterpillar slightly, and raised the hydraulic steel blade. The burning pine crashed onto the thick iron shield of the bulldozer. A shockwave of embers exploded into the air. The heavy tracks ground into the dirt, slipping for a fraction of a second before finding traction. Caleb pushed the heavy gear lever. The engine roared, vibrating so violently it felt like the steel would tear itself apart. Slowly, brutally, the caterpillar pushed the burning, 3-ton tree out of the path, tossing it aside into the brush. Nature threw its absolute worst at the old man. He pushed it back with 65 horsepower and steady hand. For 2 hours, they crawled through the Inferno. The air conditioning in the transport trucks failed, leaving the engineers weeping from the smoke. But out in the open air, Caleb kept breathing. He smelled the difference between burning pine and burning oak. He smelled the damp limestone ahead. He knew exactly where they were. Finally, the thick smoke began to thin. The blinding orange glow faded into the pale light of morning. The caterpillar broke through a final wall of thick hazel scrub. Its steel tracks clattered onto the solid asphalt of the county highway. They were out. The convoy of trucks rolled onto the pavement behind him, dragging the soot-covered command trailer and the salvaged core hardware. The fire department was already there, establishing a blockade. The firefighters stared in absolute disbelief. From out of a wall of apocalyptic fire, an ancient, rusted bulldozer had just towed an entire corporate operation to safety. Caleb pulled the throttle back. The deafening roar of the engine settled into a slow, rhythmic idle. He put the machine in neutral. He pulled the bandana down from his face, wiped his forehead with the back of his grease-stained glove, and reached for his thermos. The coffee was cold. He drank it anyway. 3 months later, the glass doors of Veridian Forestry headquarters slid open. 2 security guards escorted Marcus out of the lobby. He was holding a small cardboard box containing a few personal desk items. His tailored suit looked a little looser. He walked to his car in absolute silence. He had lost the fleet to a solar flare, and he had lost the company's pride to an old logging law. The board of directors had reviewed the salvage contract. The lawyers had tried to find a loophole. There was none. The signature was legally binding. The disaster was classified as an act of nature. Veridian Forestry was forced to write a check for $6 million. On the high ridge, overlooking the recovering black pine forest, Caleb sat on his porch. The sky was clear. The air smelled of fresh rain. On the small wooden table next to him sat a crisp, white envelope from the bank, confirming the massive deposit. He did not buy a mansion. He did not buy a sports car. He lived exactly as he always had. Beside the bank statement sat a new, heavy-duty oil filter for the D4, a box of premium cigars, and a fresh cup of hot black coffee. A sleek, black SUV pulled up his gravel driveway. A new executive stepped out. He did not wear a suit. He wore jeans and work boots. He walked up to the porch, holding his hat in his hand. He was polite. He asked Caleb if he would be willing to work as a consultant, to ride shotgun in their trucks and map his memory into their new servers, just in case the sky ever went dark again. Caleb struck a match. He lit his cigar, letting the blue smoke drift into the morning air. He looked at the executive. He nodded slowly. He told the man his consulting fee was $500 an hour, paid in cash. The executive smiled and agreed immediately. There is a profound peace in knowing who you are, and an even greater power in knowing what you are worth. The world will always try to build faster machines, write smarter codes, and replace the sweat of our fathers with the cold efficiency of a screen. But when the screens go black, and the fire is at the door, The world will always come begging for the man who knows the way home. If this story brought you a sense of justice, if it reminded you of a grandfather, a father, or a time when a handshake and a piece of paper meant something, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below and tell me about the oldest, most reliable tool you still have in your garage. Your stories keep this community alive. Until next time, keep the rust off your boots and the fire in your chest.